Welcome to the Becoming Ronin Podcast.
Becoming the person you most want to become.
So we have Joe D on the podcast this week, and I'm very excited because we have a new longevity seminar coming up. And I wanted to talk to Joe about not only longevity training, but also where we see training going as we get older. And there's a lot of, I'm sure Joe can attest to it, but our training certainly changes as each decade passes. And we not only become smarter if we are in tune with how we're training, we not only become smarter with our training, but as coaches, it behooves us to get better with the service we're delivering, which means that our training on our app and our training for our clients and our athletes, it becomes much more intuitive. Wouldn't you say, Joe?
Absolutely. We've been saying it forever as far as like you don't want to provide just cookie cutter programs to the masses. Like, yes, it's still helpful. There's a lot of people that are so clueless. Just having some kind of organization is better than nothing, obviously, right? But at the same time, you do need to listen to your body and have more of an intuitive style of training, because life gets us all. Like, shit happens that you didn't expect. We were just talking 2 seconds ago, maybe you wake up one day, you don't feel well, you have bronchitis. Today's my wife's birthday, so like my training's gonna when I normally train, we're gonna go out to dinner. So you're constantly having to kind of change things on the fly, whether it's due to a physical injury or just something in your schedule changed. So you need to get better at that as you age if you want to continue training long term.
I think one of the smartest things you've ever said was that your programs are written pencil and not pen. And that was something you instilled in me early on, probably 20 years ago, because you were dealing with such high level athletes and many different athletes from different sports. And you realized early on that many times what you have on your sheet or what you have for their workout is going to vary or change as the workout unfolds. And as you see from a coaching perspective, you're always in tune with what they're doing. As you see what they're capable of that day, things change, variations change. You bring in different modifications to help them continue training in the workout, but also, not get injured because they're not ready for something on a specific day.
Yeah.
Is that something?
When you're saying that, I just have a flashback of what's like feels like 100 years ago now, but close to 30, literally 30 years. My very first personal training client, when I interned at the Parisi Speed School for a year, didn't get paid, and then I finally got hired. I was like officially on staff, got my first athlete, I'll say athlete in quotes, like 7th grade soccer player. I was so excited. I stayed up all night, like writing this kid's program. I had the dynamic warm up all written out. I had like 20 exercises in the warm up, the workout all mapped out on my piece of paper. The kid comes in, I'm excited. And the first warm up exercise, I explained to him what we're going to do. And I'm like, all right, buddy, we're going to start with 10 bodyweight squats. And he goes, oh, I never forget it. He like bends over and like grabs his knee and goes, oh, I can't squat. I hurt my knee yesterday at practice. And I was just like, the whole routine I spent all night, and like warm up exercise number 1, it already like I had to figure out how to deviate from what was written on the paper. And now here we are 30 years later. And I think anyone who's actually trained real clients in real life for a living can relate to that story, where that's not like some crazy exception to the rule. That's more the norm of what your sessions are going to look like. So if you want longevity in your own training and or in the personal training, gym business, you better be pretty damn good at problem solving, improvising, and just changing things on the fly.
You know what that made me think of is the greater their training age, the more options you have. Does that make sense? So
Yep.
you'll take that 7th grade soccer player, and the options you have to kind of modify that body weight squat are very simple and very few. But if you have an elite power lifter, you have someone, an NFL guy or an athlete that's been through 4 years of strength conditioning in college, and then they're in the pros, or, they have much more options for those variations, not only in the warm up, but as you get into the workout. Do you think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I think that's kind of why we're so successful in the Team Forever Strong. When you say that's our fitness app, and when we look inside of those programs, we're getting such amazing feedback. And I think early on, your focus and my focus was on creating these programs with the thought of longevity. That's what this podcast is about today, just training for a lifetime. But the thought of training longevity, and it comes from all that experience with the 7th grade soccer player, but all the way to elite athletes. Or for you, some of the clients that you've had them for 20 years, right? So you've seen that progression from teenager to in their 20s to in their 30s. How are those programs changing from early on programming to now they're in their 30s? Like, what has changed as far as their maybe abilities, or how the programs have to change as their body changes?
I think it's, you have to take that mileage into account. And I think more so as they get older, when you have that 7th grade kid who never really trained before, they don't have much, if any, mileage from the weight room on their body. So you could just kind of choose whatever exercises you want. You could get away with, fortunately or unfortunately, with younger kids, if you don't put together the greatest program ever, they're young and they're resilient at that point. So it's probably not going to make that much of a difference. Certainly not immediately, which is a whole nother topic we could get into. And we've spoken about this at CPPS. It's a shame that the best coaches tend to want to work with the professional athletes, where it should be the other way around, where the best coaches are working with younger athletes and younger people during those developmental years, and when you could build that amazing foundation and not destroy their body with dumb, unnecessarily taxing training. But that's a whole nother podcast. But I think all the qualities stay the same. Like when you get a young soccer player or a young athlete, they're generally trying to improve their strength. A lot of them want to pack on some muscle. They want to improve their speed and their power. And as you age, then it becomes more of, how can we continue gaining, or at the very least maintain our muscle size, strength, and speed as we age? Because now it's just as important for life. Even if you're not a pro athlete and you're not getting paid to run and jump and perform at a high level, think of how important having muscle is, having strength is, having some foot speed to just prevent you from maybe falling down the stairs, or, tripping on ice as you get older. And then, the snowball effect, pun intended, that could kind of have you. You hear about the older person that slips on ice, hurts their hip, has surgery, and then there's complications from the surgery. Now you're a 70-plus-year-old in the hospital with these other complications. Like, it's kind of scary when you read about the statistics of, people who end up dying from just a fall. So those are the things, and those are the things. It's funny, where even that's going to be the basis of our longevity training seminar, is how do we maintain muscle size, strength, and speed as we age? Not because we're trying to make millions of dollars as a pro athlete, but just because we are trying to live our healthiest, best life, and be able to function on our own without having to be in a nursing home and having people take care of us as we age.
Well, I think that's one of the key components of programming for a longevity. Is, we were talking a couple episodes ago, this even made it in our ad for longevity, the seminar, but when you mess it up, it's too late. Like, you don't know you messed it up until it's too late,
Yeah.
Yep.
But,
Yep.
Well, I was thinking go ahead.
I was just going to say, naturally, those characteristics, those qualities, muscle size, strength, and speed, if you don't do anything there, I know people love, it sounds cool when you say age is just a number and all this, until you actually start getting older and you pass 40 and you realize, like, I know we're supposed to say it's just a number, but shit starts feeling different. Like, and
gosh.
we're in the health and fitness space, right? I'm not saying we're all the smartest three in the world, but we would be considered in the 1% of people knowledge wise, as far as how the human body works and ages and longevity and all that great stuff. And we know how our body feels as we age. And I actually had a text conversation with Andy Galpin, who does a ton of amazing research. One of the best, if not the best, as far as combining research with real world experience, and still actually works with real clients and athletes. And he was the one that provided the current research and numbers on those characteristics, where after the age of 40, he texted me, and that's what our longevity training seminar is based on. Basically, every year after the age of 40, we see a 1% reduction in muscle size, 3 to 5% reduction in strength, and 8 to 10% reduction in speed, which is kind of crazy. With every year, if you don't do anything about it, that's how much muscle size, strength, and then the speed and power just basically drops off of a cliff when you get older. So if the good news, though, is all of that can be offset with a properly designed training program. But if you don't do anything, and you're going to try to live on, age is just a number, I'm going to tell myself I feel just as good at 50 as I did at 20, good luck, because your body's going to start telling you different.
Well, I pointed at Obi because, I'm into jujitsu right now.
Yep.
And Obi's typically 99% of the time my partner. And when he's rolling with me, he'll make comments like, "Oh, is that bone dust? Like, what am I smelling?"
We said a couple episodes ago, we said Smitty's Native American name would be Walks on Dry Leaves, because the sound it makes when he walks on the mats barefoot.
That's funny.
And we're doing these moves like, X guard and, De La Hiva and all these things. And, I'm really testing my capacity with these moves. And, Obi's a young man, and he's, feeling good, moving good. He's very strong. But, for me, just to be able to, get in those positions and like trying to move out of those positions is very tough. But, it's something that I've recognized, like you said, each year your capacity decreases. So you're sort of trying to outrun that loss of strength, outrun that muscle size loss, outrun, your inability to explosively move and sprint and all those things. So I think these other activities kind of build on what we're doing in the weight room. And it seems like jujitsu, and there's other sports that do it as well, but jiu-jitsu has kind of expanded the capacity, brought me back to a level of better movement that not only age has limited and has restricted, but also what I always say is tension into the body or into the soft tissues of the body makes you rigid. So not only is strength training beneficial, but unfortunately unbalanced strength training has a negative impact on the body. It makes it very rigid. So you have to ensure, we've talked about this all the time, where sometimes the warm-up becomes the workout, where the warm-up expands into the workout and you start finding capacities that you want to work on. So for example, let's say I'm warming up to do a squat workout. Well, my hips don't feel that great and they're very rigid. So that warm-up becomes corrective, if you will, and I start maybe having some bottom end goblet squat kind of prying and some adductor stuff in there, where I'm creating isometrics, where I'm improving my hip mobility range of motion, but also my strength in this new range of motion. I think that pays off big time, especially if you've just been squatting all these years and maybe not warming up enough. But that's sort of a long-winded way.
Just to butt in
Yeah.
on that point, I think that's why you two have kind of broached the subject with true lifters, because up until this point, it's come from like yoga, and
Right.
I don't want to listen to a guy that's bendy, that's never put a barbell on his back.
Yeah.
We had a lot of lab rats. If you think back to 2005, where Elite, has all these guys on their forum ripping their quads off the bone. Like,
Right.
how are those guys doing now? And they're going to figure it out the hard way. And you guys are kind of the signal, the alarm before people go down that path, I think.
Well, I hope so. I think that's something we've done very well, is blended the maybe performance aspect or the longevity aspect with heavy strength training over the years. Don't you think, Joe?
Absolutely. And I think, as beneficial as a properly designed and executed strength program can and will be, it is truly the fountain of youth. And you hear now, like, what's her name? Dr. Gabriel Lyon talks about muscle being the organ of longevity, and trying to really push that narrative of it's not just about losing fat, it's about gaining and maintaining muscle as we age. And how do you do that with strength training? And all that is great, but the reality is, and Smitty, we've talked about this on my podcast a while back, and that's like the dark side of strength training. The reality is, most people, your average Joe who goes to the gym, does not train properly. Like, when you look at the exercise selection for their body type, it's usually completely, they're doing all the wrong exercises. They're loading them way too heavy. The range, everything's a partial range of motion, right? It's just and if you train that way, it's all the positives that you hear about strength training. The opposite is going to happen. Instead of becoming more mobile and more agile, you're going to be more rigid. Instead of prolonging your joint health and improving your bone density, you're going to, have surgery, and you're going to be tearing shit down because you're just going way too heavy and breaking down the joints and the connective tissue and everything that kind of holds our body together. And I think that conversation isn't had enough, because it's on social media. It's cool to talk about no days off and heavy AF and PRs and max effort, and everyone wants to show their heaviest, best lift. But your day-to-day training, and I'm all for still, like, you should be pushing yourself and training heavy, etc. But you need to implement it the right way. And there is that balancing act of, all right, let's push ourselves, let's go heavy, but we need to be training the majority of the time through a full range of motion. We need to be choosing the exercises that fit our body properly. Not everybody, as we speak about endlessly at the CPPS cert, not everyone should be deadlifting with a straight bar off the floor, or doing a straight bar back squat, ass to grass. Like, we try way too hard to kind of fit a square peg in a round hole, so to speak, and it ends up doing a lot more harm than good. And then I think so many people end up stopping going to the gym or their strength training efforts as they age, because they associate it with joint pain and injury, where if it was implemented properly, it could actually, there's nothing better for longevity. So that's where, we're doing our best with the Team Forever Strong app, and now with our CPPS, and now this longevity training seminar that we're going to try to piggyback off of that. But the masses still need to get that message, because you walk into a commercial gym and what you see is not what I would consider to be longevity-based strength training.
Yeah. Oh, go
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the funny thing too is, like, Vinny Scolo said this a couple episodes ago. He was in the studio and he was saying, as I progress as a coach, the equipment that I have in the gym, like, becomes more minimalist. And I was like, that's a brilliant point, because, meanwhile, you have people mimicking, people like yourself with facilities that matched you in a different phase of your coaching. And you look at someone like Steve Maxwell, who trains with like a band that I don't even know where he got that band. It's not, I don't even think it's a fitness.
Correct.
Yeah, it's just like a strap, and he does just isometrics with it. And I thought that was a brilliant point because you have the people who feel like they need their carpet and chrome and their Nautilus equipment, and there's a benefit, obviously. Like every fitness coach and strength coach in the world has their short list of their dream items, but I feel like from a coaching standpoint and building a program, not only is it about the intention, but it's about like knowing how to constantly assess and reveal what your program's currently lacking. Because it's like, if you just walked out and watered half your garden, that's the part of the garden that's going to grow and the rest is going to die. And you're going to be like, why did half my garden die? I've been watering it every day. And it's the same thing when people are like, I thought exercise is supposed to be good for your shoulders, but I blew out my rotator cuff, so.
Right. That's actually a brilliant point, because it's like the better coach I become, the less equipment I need. And I've said this before, is that all the good coaches don't necessarily know all the exercises, but they know what they're trying to do with any exercise they implement. And do you think, I want to go back to the idea of mindset early on as a lifter, as a young athlete. Do you think ego is the thing driving the PRs? Because you almost see this as like the evolution of a lifter. Like early on, I'm focusing on hitting PRs on bench, squat, and dead. But then, after I have decades and decades in the gym, it almost becomes, I just want to feel good when I wake up. And, feel good, be strong and mobile. Do you think it's sort of like the natural evolution of like ego-driven lifting versus as you get more and more miles on you, that you focus just on feeling better?
Yeah, I know me personally, being able to get out of bed and feeling a little better is way more important than an Instagram post of me benching, 425, and I got you get all the likes and comments. That's great, but at this point, if I'm striving for that, I know what my shoulders are going to feel like. I know what my low back is going to feel like, and great, all those hearts and likes on Instagram aren't with me when I'm asking Ashley to put my socks on in the morning, then it's not cool that, oh yeah, I got this viral Instagram post. Great. Now, yes, again, I still try to lift, quote unquote, as heavy as possible, but it's with pristine technique and generally in the 5 to 12 rep range now for most day, or I should say 5 to 30 rep range, more than the 1 to 5 rep range, which was early in my career. It was almost like everything is in that rep range. Now it's 5 or 6 to 30 is what I'm trying to accomplish, and only if it feels good while doing it. Like I've now gotten to that point where if I do a set and I'm doing the universal, grabbing the shoulder and the bench press universal symbol where you're rubbing your AC joint and you're doing shoulder circles, and then you just throw another plate on and it hurts some more. Like now, if something hurts in a bad way, it's okay. What's plan B? What's plan C? There's just too many tools in the toolbox to, again, force a square peg in a round hole. I'm not willing to do that damage to my body, because surgery sucks. The recovery, there's no telling once you get to that point if you need surgery. I've had 4. 2 of them were botched in my back, and I live with it to this day. So I know there's no such thing as minor surgery, and anything could happen. So I always have that in the back of my head when I'm choosing an exercise. Every set, every rep, it's got to be pristine technique. It's got to be on point. I'm still working hard. But if I don't feel better leaving the gym, I take a long, hard look at that workout, the exercises I've done, and I make changes for the next one, because it's not about the viral Instagram post. It's not about one lift anymore. It's about, I want to keep doing this every day that I am on this earth. So how do we do that long term? And that's just training smarter. And just one more thing on that, because Smitty, you said like the better coach you've become, the less equipment you need and you use. It's funny because I totally understand that, but I was thinking the opposite. I'm like, the more things I'm willing to use, not that you certainly don't need a lot of equipment. We've all been in the, like, I made a living off of the minimalist literal storage closet, and my views haven't changed in that sense. You do not need a lot of equipment. You don't need fancy equipment to train anyone. But I was a guy who would never be caught dead with like a leg press, a chest press machine, a cable unit in my gym. Now in my little garage gym that I could only fit about, 4 or 5 pieces of equipment in, 3 of them are machines. There, I got cable unit, I got a pec fly machine, a hip thrust machine, a chest press machine, just because they feel better. And I think that's a big shift I've made, going back kind of full circle to where we started this with. As you age, generally speaking, you want to maintain or gain muscle strength and your speed / power. I will do those. I will develop those 3 things with any tool. Now I'm not so like narrow-minded to think like, oh, you're a pussy if you use machines. Like, what's wrong if a chest press machine feels better on your shoulders and you're still getting a stimulus for your chest and just a good horizontal press stimulus? Who cares if you sprinkle in a chest press if a leg press feels a little bit better for you than putting a barbell on your back every week? That's where, like, that's a major change that I've made, is I have no hard rules on the equipment I use. Whatever feels good at this point, I'm willing to use.
You mentioned, I want to go round back to this. You mentioned pristine technique as far as something that should be an absolute focus on in the gym. Can you talk to the idea that I can throw myself under the bus where early on as a coach, I might have thought that all squats should look the same. But in fact, there's like these individual differences between body type. You mentioned body type, limb length, torso length, all these different variations where there are principles to pristine technique and things that you want to look at for each movement pattern. But because of these individual differences, certain exercise will look different between lifters. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, not to just repeat it, but there are some basics when we teach a squat that, just as an example, if you take a squat, never do you want to look like the letter C, right? Where your spine is just folded over and flexed with a heavy load on your back. Like, regardless, there are certain things we're going to look for and we're going to teach, and that's going to be pretty universal. But you have to coach technique based on the body type of your client and your specific body type. You need to figure out, again, and even if you don't have to have a PhD in kinesiology or biomechanics. Very simply, if you're listening to this and you're not a personal trainer, you're not a gym owner, you're just listening for your own training and to better your own training. If something hurts, either don't do it or find a professional to look at you and help you understand why does this, will take the squat, why does it hurt my low back so much when I'm told it's supposed to strengthen my glutes, my quads, my hamstrings, whatever. And they might be able to help you. A qualified coach should be able to help you discover your personal technique. For example, one thing being like a West Side and learning the bench squat and deadlift early on from Louis Simmons VHS tapes, I taught the squat with a hip hinge. Like, you initiate the squat by pushing your hips back first, then you force the knees out, bend the knees, squat down. That was it. How many times did we use the cues hips back, hips back, hips back forever? Then started working with some longer limbed clients and like longer legs, and which I'm the opposite. I have a long torso, very short legs. So I think just inherently you'll always default. We all have our biases, whether you want to believe it or not. Like, I've been biased by how I've trained and how my body feels and my body type, but there's people with the exact opposite body type. And that comes to mind because I remember a few times teaching these longer legged clients to initiate the squat by pushing their hips back, push their hips back, push their hips back. And it always looked odd and they felt uncomfortable and they couldn't get it right. And then I put my ego to the side and tried having them break at the knees first, kind of push their knees forward slightly, almost get the knees out of the way, then hip hinge. So the opposite of how I've always squatted and taught it. And they all felt a million times better. And that was like a big light bulb for me where it was, man, how many other exercises are like that? Where just a little tweak because a different body type, they're, to your point, pristine, quote unquote, pristine technique is going to be a little bit different if we wrote down the bullet points on paper. Theirs is going to be different than mine, but they still need to, once they have that technique, then you need to maintain that. Don't just try to add more weight on the bar to add more weight on the bar. Once you have determined your pristine technique, it is not a PR unless everything that encompasses your pristine technique, you need to be able to check all those boxes off and then add more weight. Like all the same exact conditions under which your previous lift was made, you need that. And then an extra rep or an extra 2.5 or 5 pounds. That's a PR, not just, hey, I did 100 pounds last week, so I'm going to throw 120 on this week. Get it by any means, faster, bounce the weight, round my back, do whatever it takes. And I'm going to call it a PR. That doesn't count as a PR. So I know a lot in there, but I think that's the big thing. It's the combo of technique and effort. I think there's too much of one of each. You know, you have the nerd. I call him, like I joke and say, like Timmy the technique god, like the personal trainer who's just that nerd that's always hounding you on your technique, but never hands his clients anything heavier than a 2-pound dumbbell. That's not the best way to go.
That's good.
But the meathead power lifter who's like, you got to get strong at it by any means, and it's just loading weight on at the expense of technique. That's not the best way to go. We need the combination of technique and continued effort and progressive overload. Yeah. Now you have yourself a longevity-based strength training program.
See, I think public enemy number one of longevity isn't ego. I think it's mimicry. Like when people emulate both form and, you know, you talked about, you know, social media and longevity. And I think a lot of times, obviously Instagram's a highlight reel. And I think that most people are just emulating what they see. And I think that's where you guys come in, because if you look at your Instagrams, there's so much good knowledge of like feel good training.
Yeah, it's not as flashy, certainly not as flashy as you'll see on Instagram, but it's certainly tried and true and something that's been in the trenches, experience and all that. I honestly think it is flashy. I think the problem is, well, that's because you're a knowledgeable coach. You're not just like, you know, someone looking for something flashy.
That could be. I mean, it's definitely not as, you know, YTWs aren't as flashy as a 405 bench, but I think it's like a responsibility you have as a coach to level set the people who follow you for information and not give in. It's self-indulgent to only post, you know, the things that bring likes. And I think, you know, once you have eyes on you, you have a responsibility to be more like, we know movement is medicine. So why is everyone taking someone else's prescription? You know, it's like, it's, you know, you guys are like pharmacists, you know, it's like,
well, you know, it's funny that you said mimicry. You know, it made me think of Joe was talking about Louis Simmons. And at some point, everyone thought the best squat technique was this huge, you know,
arch,
hips back, knees out, and because they were mimicking
exactly same thing.
They're mimicking
someone
West Side,
you know?
Mimicking Louis Simmons's technique, but it was very specific to powerlifters who were wearing squat suits and briefs and all that stuff. So mimicry would certainly.
It's like what we talked about with German volume training or, you know, French contrast training. Yeah. We've gone into those episodes, and one of the things that the caveats is always like, you have to understand where this training is coming from before you implement it. You have to know why they're using it.
Don't blindly follow it.
Right.
Like, why are you? Well, the thing I wanted to piggyback on what Joe was saying with the technique and where technique has to be there even when the load comes on. Well, what we say in longevity circles, or, you know, Joe and I focus on in our message to people on our app or at the cert, is that better technique is a PR, right? So most people think more reps on a certain exercise with a specific weight or more load, progressive overload on a certain exercise is the only way to get a PR. Well, improved technique, let's say I grind out 8 reps on the squat week 1. Well, week 2, if I had that same weight and I'm trying to hit 8 reps, but that 8th rep was cleaner, I had position. Joe talked about it shouldn't look like a C. My back should be straight. You know, I had tension throughout the entire repetition. I had a full range of motion. That's a PR from week 1, right? So we shouldn't get caught up in the volume and the load as the only way to progress a certain lift. And I wanted to kind of, you mentioned how we're kind of organizing the longevity seminar. Joe, you talked about mobility, hypertrophy, strength, power, and speed. Can you talk to just why we came up with that flow for the longevity seminar, and why do you think that's kind of the best method to get the system across to the lifter?
Yeah, I think it's a great blend of what the research is saying and what we experience in the real world. And again, just to reiterate, I think anyone over the age of 30, even 30, I would say, depending on how active you were in your teens and 20s, but definitely 35 to 40, you know, mobility starts to go. Like certain positions that you never thought about, putting your shoes and socks on in the morning, whatever it is, bending down to pick up your kids, play with your dog, it just starts feeling different as you get older. And I'm someone who stretches every day, does mobility, strength train through a full range of motion, and I feel it. And again, having some old surgeries and scar tissue, I just feel, even though I'm doing everything the same, if not more and better and more educated, things just starting to feel different mobility wise. So we know we lose that. I don't know if by what percentage, but if you're over the age of 35, you know it starts to feel different. I don't need research studies to tell me that. And then and we actually have research for the hypertrophy, strength, and speed. Like I mentioned before, it's about 1% reduction in muscle size, 3 to 5% in strength, and 8 to 10 in speed and power. So what we do is we take those main characteristics, those qualities that we know we lose if we don't train properly: mobility, hypertrophy, strength, and then speed. And we're going to teach the attendees how to train what we are calling the longevity based approach to developing those characteristics, which is thinking about and addressing all the things we discussed. Like, how do we improve mobility, strength, power, speed without it breaking down our body more, without adding more mileage to our body? How do we do that? How do we improve upon those areas and actually feel better when we get up the next morning? And we use the term a lot. Try to feel as good as you look. We all want to look better. We go to the gym. You want to get a little more jacked, drop some body fat, gain some muscle. Looking better is great, but we want you to feel even better than you look. And that's where I think we have a very unique experience-based approach to developing those things, which I don't know if you want to get a little bit into some of the things we're going to go over at the seminar. I don't want to give too much away, but
well, I mean,
that's the overview of the seminar series.
Well, is there maybe like one specific tip for each section that we could provide? I could start with the mobility. Well, I wanted to quickly just make a statement that I was thinking about how the longevity seminar fits into the CPPS model. And the way I describe it is that when we did the CPPS football, it was the CPPS principles applied to the game of football. This is the CPPS principles applied to longevity training, or how we're going to apply them for getting a more comprehensive model for training for a lifetime. So the first section that we're going to go over when we get to the seminar is mobility. One of the best things I've done in the last 5 years was just focusing on nasal only breathing during the warm up. And the reason why that's important is I was describing it to someone at jiu-jitsu the other day was when you shut your mouth, everything becomes much more intentional. And if you keep your mouth shut during the warm up, the strider stretch, deep goblet squats, all these things that you're trying to unlock the body relaxes because you're becoming more intentional and you spend more time deeper into the stretch. One of the important things about expressing better mobility or exploring more mobility is really getting to that end range of motion and exploring with tension or just kind of reaching into a deeper stretch. And if you have your mouth shut, you're breathing deeper, you're relaxing, it's more parasympathetic. But again, when the body senses stress or strain, what is our natural response? It's to hold our breath. Well, what's holding our breath do? Create more stability, create more resistance, maybe neurologically preventing us from moving in a certain range of motion. So keeping your mouth shut, breathing deep inhale, breathing deep exhale through your nose, and using that focus when you're in your mobility application of the warm-up. And not only that, we talk about in CPPS where we're extending the warm-up into the workout with fillers and resets and all these different things. Nasal only breathing is that kind of inset or working into parasympathetic or just relaxing the body. And then, post workout, we get into box breathing and recovery and all that stuff, but just focusing on initially keeping your mouth shut in the mobility section, it's going to pay off big time. And also you're going to gain deeper access into the diaphragm, right? Mm-hmm. Most people are breathing only with their accessory breathing muscles. They're hypertonic, their body's hypertonic. They're really hyperventilating all day long, very short inhales and short exhales. We're going to start accessing the diaphragm, getting it stronger, breathing deeper, and really focusing on our breathing, which will pay off big time, not only in our ability to recover and relax, but also when we start thinking about it, this breathing thing kind of goes into strength training because we're going to use our breath for bracing. We talked about keeping the spine straight and safe. That's all about being able to access the breath, but also use that breath set position and then brace everything and keep ourselves safe. So breathing is really sort of the hidden gem that nobody's utilizing, especially young athletes or young lifters. They don't know anything about the breathing, but if you become more intentional with your breathing, that's a huge inline into training better, technique improves, and also you start understanding how to relax the body, especially if you're under stress or anxiety.
I love who was the that's all awesome stuff. And I'm thinking of at Swiss who said breathing is mobility from the inside.
Oh, Paul Gagné.
Yes.
Yeah.
GSP's guy, that he was awesome. And I just, that was one of the best quotes I've ever heard,
Yeah. And
well, it's funny that you bring that up because I was just reading Body by Breath. I know you guys have looked through that, Jill Miller's new book, and that was the chapter I just finished up was about that. And she said that, tone and tension is an autonomic function.
Yeah.
The only window we have into the autonomic nervous system is breathing. It's the only thing that we can control is our respiratory rate. And, the commonality between their shared nerves is what massages the vagal tone into submission. And I thought that was a brilliant way to put it. Yeah. And it's funny because we relearn these things, and as many times I've been to the CPPS, I feel like I'm always learning it over and over again. But I think as much as people get that breathing does, at least for me, I'm a causation guy. I need to know why it's doing that so I can, the intention of any corrective exercise. If you know why you're doing it, it'll be much easier to implement. So I feel like the breathing thing, you guys could talk about all of this and it's helpful and it's good knowledge, but going to the certification and doing again, I won't give anything away, but all the breathing drills and things like that, you understand on a much deeper level.
Yeah. And basically what Paul Gagné was saying was he was using the breath at end range of motion. So for example, and this is something it's funny that our experience has brought us to a position where we were already doing what he was showing. But let's say you're doing a sideline windmill. Joe, what do we always say? Like when you get into that further excursion where it's very tight, we say breathe in that position. That's probably 20 years ago, Gray Cook said, if you can breathe in a position, you can own that position. Well, breathing is our unlock when we're in a very in-range of motion or something that's very restricted, and we start breathing, we get to that very restricted position and we start breathing and unlocking that position. Then we can further get into a deeper excursion of that range of motion after we unlock that e-brake, if you will. But so we'll go deeper into that in at the seminar, and we'll talk about that. But if you want further information, look up our CPPS certification at cppscoaches.com. But can you give us a tip, Joe, on just maybe hypertrophy, strength, power, and speed, and just
sure.
Just one simple tip that we can share.
Starting with, say, the speed and power, because again, that's the physical quality we lose first and most of the next three that we're going to talk about. Like I mentioned, if you look at like the Masters, just to kind of back that, go look at the Masters track and field records, like the 100-meter record for over 40, over 50, over 60. And
it was like 4 minutes, right?
It's like, it's not far off. Like if you look at the performances and then look at, say powerlifting, some dudes are peaking in their late 30s, even early 40s, right? They're winning the open division, and at 50 you still got some pretty strong dudes. It's much, and yeah, of course it starts to drop off, but I just think that's a great real world example. Look at powerlifting Masters records versus sprint Masters records.
Well, that's a good point, because no one ever says like, you hear people saying mature muscle in bodybuilding and powerlifting. No one ever is like, oh, he's got a mature speed.
There's no mature speed. No. Mature speed is you're sitting on the sidelines watching. Yeah. So I just, I always like the real world stuff. So that's just a cool, if for those who are interested, just go check that out. It's pretty interesting. But it's, speaking of that speed aspect that we do just have a tendency to lose so much of, it's also the area that I think when people try to maintain it or gain it as they age, you're most likely to get injured, because how many people, I haven't sprinted or I haven't played basketball since high school or college. Now they're 40. They go just try to jump into a pickup basketball game and they blow their Achilles out. You can't just jump back into sprinting, jumping, or anything explosive. It's super important to not neglect it. But if you have neglected it, I think the best quick advice I could give on a podcast conversation like this is just think low risk, high reward type of exercises. So, I've kind of been known as someone, we've all loved the sled training forever. I think that's a perfect example. You want to start reintroducing sprints back into your program. Don't just go out and run a 40-yard dash or a 100-meter dash. You're going to end up pulling your hamstring, or you're tearing something. Did you guys see Kevin Hart a couple months ago when he pulled his hammy?
Tore his adductor.
That both adductors. He's in a wheelchair for weeks.
I mean,
he did a sprint.
Obi, you gotta look. I don't know.
Oh my God.
There was one video. I think he took them. He must have had them all taken down.
He scrubbed the internet.
Absolutely. There's one video of like a cell phone camera of him racing his buddy, and he tears one adductor, and then with the next step tears the other one. He was in a wheelchair for weeks, if not months. It was really bad.
Yeah.
But perfect example of don't just start sprinting.
He's in his 40s, right? But he works out, but he's
yes. That's why I'd say it's, and I not to make fun of the guy because he's fine now, but it was a pretty bad, he was in a wheelchair for a couple weeks, if not months. But I think he's a great example because he's a workout guy. He's in phenomenal shape, works out every day, the whole thing. He lifts, he does, cardio, but he doesn't clearly sprint often. And then look what happened. And he's in better shape than 99% of the 40-year-olds out there. So don't think you're going to get away with just jumping right back into things. So you would want to, just one of many examples, maybe you lightly load a sled or a prowler and you quote unquote sprint with that, whether you kind of push it and run with it or you strap it to your waist with a rope or a sled strap and you sprint that way. What that's going to do is reduce your speed drastically from a regular flat out sprint, right? So the potential of you pulling an adductor, pulling a hamstring is way reduced, but it's a great workout from an effort standpoint. It's still going to be kind of hard, but because you're leaning on that sled, or if the sled's behind you and you're have the weight strapped around your waist, you're able to kind of lean and the sled offsets some of your weight. So from an effort standpoint, it's hard, but as far as potential for pulling a muscle, it reduces exponentially. So one of like the best ways to reintroduce speed training is running with a sled, running up a hill. Again, effort wise, it's going to be kind of difficult, but because your speed is reduced, way less injuries and pulled muscles running up a hill versus running on flat ground. And both of those are great because they actually reinforce proper mechanics, acceleration mechanics. So if you're interested, which you should be, because the better, you don't have to, study sprint mechanics like you're an Olympic sprinter. But if you could clean up your technique a little bit and run more efficiently as you continue progressing with your speed training and incorporating sprints, you'll be less likely to pull a muscle when your technique is on point. So just an example of how to maybe reintroduce speed into your programming. It jumps same way. Think low risk, high reward. And the best single piece of advice I could probably give is start with extensive jumps, not intensive jumps. So something like jumping rope or in place pogo jumps, that's extensive, right? It's not super intense. You're really preparing the soft tissue, the Achilles tendon for more intense, single effort jumps or multiple jumps. If you're going to do hurdle hops or something like that down the road, you don't just want to start with that. You want to start with light, in place, longer duration types of jumps, which again aren't sexy. It's not going to get you a ton of likes on Instagram, you doing some pogo jumps or jumping rope, but that will prepare your body for then, I would say, you progress to jumping onto something like a box jump. And then eventually you're doing you could do things like hurdle hops and reactive, more intense jumps. But just like you wouldn't. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think it was you that opened my eyes to the fact that when someone jumps on a box, obviously, we all understand it's a lower impact exercise because you're landing at the apex. But the other thing is the height of the box doesn't change the height of the hips. It's just about how quickly you can bring your feet up. But we have clients, well into their 70s who have done very low level jumps, like on a 45-pound bumper, and if you look at the height of their hips versus, a 30-year-old client who's jumping on a 20-inch box, not that they're super close, like they're pretty close, a lot closer than you'd think. As soon as you're
of the hips, right?
Yeah,
it's
like
the
the distance of their hips from the ground.
Absolutely, which you don't need. It's not about, exactly to your point. You could displace your hips more each week and keep jumping on the 45-pound bumper plate. Just
right.
My cue is always, hey, try to clear it by more than you did last week. Think like a rainbow. Jump up and then land in the center of that bumper plate, or a 6-inch or 12-inch box. You could still, from a effort standpoint, try to jump as high as you can and then come down, land soft, as opposed to highest possible box and you're just doing whatever it takes to get your feet up there. Because I've had some great box jumpers that when you watch the video, I mean, there's dudes, 50-inch box jump, but if you watch their hips, they may only move maybe 6 to 8 inches. They just have great hip mobility, which is great. Like, again, it all depends. It depends on your goals. What are you doing the exercise for? There's more nuance to it. But for general pop, and if you're programming box jumps because you're trying to maintain or gain the ability for your body to just move quickly, from a risk reward standpoint, pick a box that you can clear in your sleep and just try to displace your hips, as Obi said, and clear that box by as much as possible. So almost like you're about to jump over it, and then you jump up and clear it by 12 inches and then land in the center, nice and soft, step down, repeat. You're going to get way more out of that type of box jump and see way less injuries.
That's brilliant.
Calvin started with a new woman yesterday, and he was taking her through the assessment and her first workout, and she was watching one of our high school athletes doing box jumps, and she was like, please, don't ever make me do that. My friend trained at another gym. And it was funny because I knew exactly what she was going to say, and Calvin interrupted her and knew what she was going to say also. He goes, let me guess, CrossFit class, and she ended up skinning her shins, and she thought it was like, a mind reader. Like, how do you know her? Like, how did you know what I was about to say? He goes, it's very common. And that's just the example of way too high of a box with the wrong population for the wrong reason. And that's why you can't just make the claim, are box jumps good or bad? There's nuance to everything. Why are you programming it? How are you programming it, etc.? So there is a very, very safe way to program box jumps for longevity purposes. And then finally, for strength and hypertrophy, I'll just kind of clump them together for the purpose of this podcast. I think I put together 12 longevity laws that we're going to be kind of covering at the seminar. But the first one I already mentioned: if it hurts, either don't do it or find out why it hurts and make the changes so it doesn't hurt. If something hurts because you're so immobile, you can't get in the proper position, I don't want to give the impression where we're saying, oh, just don't do it, ignore it, and move on to something else. Yes, there's always another option, and you can continue training that pattern, that movement, whatever it is. But I still think it's important to figure out, why did that exercise hurt? Let me try to correct that so it doesn't hurt and I don't end up causing more problems down the road. With that being said, that goes hand in hand with kind of longevity law number 2, which we already touched on a bit, which is there are no mandatory exercises. I think you can't overstate that one. You can't talk about that enough. If we all talked about it on every podcast, I still don't think it would be enough, because people need to hear it more. You do not have to just mimic what other people are doing. There's no hard rules saying every upper body session has to start with a barbell bench press, or every lower body session has to start with a barbell squat. There are so many different specific exercises to choose from, and we all get caught up in that, where the important thing is you just want to make sure, for a well-rounded longevity-based program, yes, you want to be incorporating the foundational movement patterns in your program: a squat, a hinge, a lunge, an upper body push, an upper body pull, some kind of a carry or a drag. I do think it's important to incorporate those patterns, but the specific exercise you choose, or exercises you choose for each, does not freaking matter, especially as you get older. If you're not competing in powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting or a sport, it doesn't matter if it's a machine bench press, a dumbbell bench press, a weighted push-up. Just train those patterns, strengthen them, progress over time, and you're going to be ahead of 99% of the population.
Nothing done well is insignificant.
That's right. I did want to end the podcast. It's funny. I often follow Brad Schoenfeld. He's pioneer in muscle hypertrophy, and he has that legendary meta-analysis of mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy. And he's someone Joe and I kind of have been following for many years. One of the caveats to longevity, and one of the laws that Joe and I often say is our goal is to figure out ways to how to make lightweights feel heavy. And if we're going to talk about laws of longevity, this is one of the laws that you have to understand when you move into this idea of training for the rest of your life, because it's not always about adding more weight to the bar. And we mentioned that earlier, but I was looking up Brad's stuff on Twitter, and he actually made a recent post about this concept. And what he said was, quoting, "When I was an up-and-coming exercise science student, it was taught that light loads were suboptimal for hypertrophy. Today, the overwhelming body of evidence indicates otherwise." So, and he actually goes on to say that he did an actual research study, strength and hypertrophy adaptations between low versus high load resistance training. And it's funny how sometimes science is catching up to experience and what we've been doing in the trenches for many years. But do you want to talk a little bit, just real quick, why it's important to understand this concept of how to make lightweights feel heavy?
Yeah, I've been following him and that research too, because it is, a lot of people sent it to me for that reason. I think they've seen our programming over the years, and now you have, science backing it more. But
it's the same thing as your prowler training, right?
Yeah.
Where you're doing
like
it
eventually it catches up, which that's not to get off on a tangent, but that's like that whole like evidence-based trainer thing where they look down on, I'll say me and us. I don't know how much like research you guys spend time on. I don't have PubMed saved in my bookmarks. I generally go on there when someone sends me a new study and says, "Hey, I think you'd find this interesting." Then I do love that stuff, and I love reading up on. It's the only thing I really I don't really have any other hobbies. I still enjoy this like I did day one, but it's funny to me that these evidence-based people, I'll post something and someone will say like, "Oh, this clearly not an evidence-based guy. Tell me you don't, follow the research without telling me you don't follow research." All this annoying shit. But if you are I was thinking about this the other day. If you're an evidence-based person, researcher, trainer yourself, the research itself actually tells us that research and data changes every couple months or at least years, right? So why is it so foreign and crazy to people that there might be someone that has a shit ton of experience teaching something, programming a little bit different than what the research is saying, when the research that we know today is probably going to change in the next couple months or years anyway? So why is it so baffling to you, and why is it so looked down upon if someone incorporates something in their training, in their programming, in their teaching that hasn't been backed by the research yet, when we know the research that's out there right now is going to change anyway? And generally it catches up to those who are actually I call them experience-based trainers and coaches that are just in the gym doing the damn thing. So and plus the fact there's always the research gives us the average, right? And if you work with enough people, yes, for the most part, the research might line up with many of your clients, but I can't, I've lost count of the amount of clients I've worked with that are outliers on both ends, like the genetic freak that's a genetic freak outlier, and then the other end of the spectrum that is not, below the average and just has some, whatever it may be, genetic issues, has had a weird injury. I'm one with my low back. 99% of the advice I give for low back pain that helps 99% of the people I give it to, I don't do myself, because I have some weird shit with like nerve damage and scar tissue that a lot of the great advice that works for many aggravates my issue. So like, it's just, sorry, I know you're trying to wrap this up and I'm getting off on a tangent, but that whole like evidence and experience,
Eric
the
Weinstein.
evidence-based people looking down on us kind of bothers me.
The best thing I ever heard was Eric Weinstein said something along the lines of science is a process, not a conclusion. And people of the
That's awesome.
scientific method know that. So when people make bold claims that science knows something conclusively, it's the antithesis of the scientific method, you know. And the other thing is science values experiential evidence. You know, science is all about making a consensus based off of the evidence. And who has more evidence than someone that's been in the trenches, you know, collecting? It might not be collected in data and then peer reviewed, and you know, and that's, you know, one thing. I get why that process is in place, but you can't, like you're saying, you cannot discount the evidence of the people that are actually practicing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just, I'll answer your question, Smitty. Speaking of evidence, I think this is cool,
Right.
With the hypertrophy research, which now, like Brad has talked about, it being up no different if we're talking about sets of 30, if they're taken, you know, near failure, to failure, close to failure, or sets of 5 to 6. It's really that last 5 or so reps before we reach failure where mechanical tension is the greatest, etc., which is all cool stuff and lines up exactly with a lot of our workouts. We start, or maybe we might do the reverse workout order now, but main lift being maybe in that 3 to 5, 3 to 6 rep range. Then you do a supplemental lift or two in that 6 to 10, 6 to 12 rep range. And then you have things like shoulder shockers and the gun show where we're doing higher rep up to 30 rep type sets. That always just, that was not based on any research. It was based on common sense and what felt right to me and my clients. I think because I've gotten, on my podcast, I got a couple questions, people saying there are some quote unquote hypertrophy coaches that say, if we know it's that last 5 to 6 reps that creates the greatest mechanical tension, and that's what's responsible for muscle growth, doing anything over, say, 7 or 8 reps is a complete waste of time. Why not just pretty much do 99% of your training in that 5 to 7 rep range, as heavy as possible, 5 to 7 reps, all exercises? It'll save you time. It's more efficient. You're just fatiguing yourself and you're wasting time by doing these higher rep sets. And I think on paper, you might think and say, what, that, I guess that does kind of make sense, right? Why crush myself with that brutal 30 rep set that burns like hell when I could have just did a 6 rep set? But if you've lifted weights, you know, like not every exercise is conducive to 5 or 6 reps. I know me, with what my shoulders have been through, I'm not doing 5 rep sets of lateral raises. That's why just inherently I always programmed, not always, but on average 15 to 20, 15 to 30 rep sets of a lateral raise, a rear delt raise. It doesn't feel good for me to pick up a 60-pound dumbbell and try to do 5 or 6 reps, where on the other end of that, your main barbell lifts, maybe a bench, a squat, a deadlift, those strength movements. Not that you never do high rep stuff, but it always just felt right to stick more in that, 3 to 5, 3 to 6 rep range. And it was just based on what felt right and experience, and athletes that have shoulder issues and don't want to do certain exercises real heavy. That's where that combo of strength, neural drive, CNS kind of output exercises coupled with lighter, although you're still going as heavy as you can for 20 or 30 reps, but lighter weight, more pump. And the research may now be saying like the metabolic stress might not be one of the main mechanisms, but it's all just verbiage. Like we still know that you could build muscle in the lower rep ranges all the way up to the higher rep ranges. It's just we know a little bit more the reason why, but experience wise, how we were programming 20 plus years ago is now backed by scientific evidence and data, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah.
I think the important thing you said also is even the heavy barbell lifts, if they're saying, the last 5 reps, you don't always want to pull deadlifts for 8 or squats for
Exactly.
8, singles, doubles, triples, fives, those are beautiful. And I'll tell you what, like as you get older, you want to keep your main lifts on the lower end and you can keep the intensity a little higher. It's the supplemental and accessory stuff where you can get very creative and get into that burn and those higher rep volumes. But to your point, like you don't want to do isolation exercises with a weight heavy enough where you can only do 8 reps. If you're trying to follow the science and only the last 5 or you're just grinding it out, it's just you're at a disadvantage leverage wise, but also the muscles working more in isolation. And that's why the lighter weights for the things that build the main lift are more apropos, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Plus, to that point, I mean, on the other side of that point, the more time under tension, if you're doing a set of 30 band pull aparts, one of the things that I've realized in my coaching career is that if you want to really be effective with corrective exercises, fatigue the A team, right? If someone's doing a band pull apart and they're shrugging and they feel it in their neck, and I now will allow bad reps because I know that as time under tension builds up, they'll re-strategize and they'll start to recruit the B team muscles, ones that they wouldn't normally if they were only doing 5 reps.
Right.
So with a light load and a lot of reps, you can then send more water to the garden where eventually it'll reach those pockets that they've neglected.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, and just last thing on all this, I think another area where the research kind of caught up to what we've been teaching forever on the last 5 reps and going to failure, those being the main drivers of hypertrophy, right? Everyone jumped on that bandwagon, and all over Instagram and TikTok, I see you got to train to failure. Everything's got to be to failure, which for the lower load, higher rep accessory type movements, we that's kind of what we've always done for the most part, some exceptions in there. But we've always talked about leaving 1 to 2 reps in the tank most of the time on the heavier 1 to 5 rep stuff. And now with all the craze on you got to go to failure, now they've clarified that and said with the heavier loads, if you're in that 5 rep range ish, there's just as much muscle built with 1 to 2 reps in reserve, because you're getting high levels of mechanical tension from the very first rep. So it's still an incredible stimulus for hypertrophy, which personally, I never did it for that reason. For me, it was always just safer. It's a real heavy weight. I don't want guys failing. Let's pick a weight that I know you could get for 6 or 7, and let's do 5. That's just always how I programmed it. It's heavy enough to get strong, but it's safe. I don't want people failing. Mentally, I don't like people failing a lot because then they get down and they're pissed off the rest of the workout. And it's just safer. It was like, let me cover my ass in my gym. I don't want people getting hurt. And now the research has backed that too for hypertrophy, saying don't get too crazy on this going to failure stuff. If you're going to go heavy, it probably is smarter to leave 1 or 2 reps in the tank because you get the same hypertrophy stimulus without the risk of taking a heavier set to failure. So
it reminds me of when we were at the Swiss.
Are you going to say
Stuart McGill? I got this one. So, you weren't there this last year, but
No.
Stuart McGill talked, and one of the parts, it's funny because Smitty and I feel like we're the only two that he said this, and Smitty and I were about to applaud, and no, he said, every bad rep pollutes the motor engram. And so he is, with his rehab practice, he's all about super clean, intentional reps. And, even if it wasn't for hypertrophy alone, just building a better base, a movement quality alone, just leave some reps in the tank for sure.
Yeah, you don't want to end the training session with a failure. But I mean, that's old school mentality. The way we say it in Team Forever Strong, there's 2 ways we do it. If we do percentage-based training, we always say, well, whatever your 1 rep max is, you don't work from percentages of your 1 rep max. You work from 90% of your 1 rep max and then use percentages off of that. Yeah. The other thing that we always say is if we're working up to a 5 to set. So there's percentage based maxes and there's rep maxes. Rep maxes are, hey, work up to a heavy 7, work up to a heavy 5. And in that training, we always say, well, whatever you work up to in the heavy 5, it's something you could have hit 7 with, right? To Joe's point, it's always going heavy, taking it to the extreme, but a step back from the edge, because you don't, especially as you get with the heavier loads with the main lifts, you're just asking for trouble. You're asking for one bad repetition could hurt your shoulders for the rest of your life, could hurt your knee the rest of your life, and it'd be something you'd be dealing with. So take a step back from the edge, program more conservative with the load, and focus on technique. That's the whole kind of concept in laws, the longevity laws. That's law number 1. But we look forward to everyone coming to the longevity seminar. It's going to be August 4th. There's still 2 weeks to register. You can register last day if you want. Go to cppscoaches.com, go to schedule, and you'll see the longevity seminar. We have a huge, nice gym, Joe Meglio's in Springfield, New Jersey. There's lots of room. We want to pack the place out. So if you're interested in learning how to train safely the rest of your life, go to cppscoaches.com, go to schedule. And any last words on the longevity seminar or anything you want to promote, Joe?
No, other than I'm excited for it. It's going to be a great weekend. We're tag teaming the CPPS with the longevity, sir. People are excited. We do have whatever, I don't know what the final number is, but I know it's getting close to being sold out. But like you said, Joe has a huge gym, so we could handle a few more. If you haven't pulled the trigger yet, come check it out. It's going to be life-changing. Like, truly, It will change the way you train for the rest of your life and be able to enable you to train longer without getting injured. So it's the first one we've ever done. This is stuff we've spoken about. It's been very popular on podcasts within our Team Forever Strong app, but we've never done a full seminar, full day, just focused on this area. So I'm super excited about it. You're not going to want to miss it. Hope to see you in August.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Appreciate
Thank you
being
guys.
on.
Always great talking with you. Nice to catch up. And
we'll see you soon.
Looking forward to seeing you guys.
Boom.
Good job, bro.
Awesome. That was fun.
Yeah, that was really good.